the FedNow, which is
Okay.
a new program that they released, and it's supposed to allow financial institutions safe, efficient, 24/7 instant payment services.
Check out the website simplepassivecashflow.com for podcasts, videos, articles, and free e-courses. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to the team via email and we'll get you pointed in the right direction, whether it be an educational course or information about syndication deals. If you haven't read my book, The Journey to Simple Passive Cashflow, click the link below to get a free copy. Thanks to John and the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast. Our team is here to help you take the first step, or if you're a seasoned investor, then we're here to expand your reach into alternative investing.
Are you tired of trying to keep ahead in the rat race, only to have so much of your hard-earned money going to the tax collector? Equity doesn't pay the bills. Retirement savings don't pay you now, and there are only 24 hours in a day to work. The only solution is passive income that pays you 24/7 now, not 40 years from now. From vetted investment opportunities to tax saving strategies. Let John guide you through all the confusion and take control of your financial life in pursuit of financial freedom. So sit back, relax, and welcome to the Wealth and Freedom Nexus.
You know, for the most passive returns in real estate investing, I like to put my money with Freedom Family Investments, a team I personally trust because they pay me steady streams of cash flow, hassle-free, all while doing the things I love. Returns are better and more reliable than the stock market, up to 12%. I love that tax benefits offset capital gains or your W-2 income. For a little insider pro tip, knowing who to trust is key to success in investing. Freedom Family Investments has a perfect track record of paying their investors right on time. To learn more, text family to 66866. If you want to invest on autopilot with people I personally trust and with a team who cares about you reaching your financial goals, go ahead and text family to 66866. Hey there, welcome back to the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast. As always, I'm John Rickgarn, your host, investor, educator, and realtor. As always, if you're not following me on all my social media channels, be sure to check out wfreedomnexus.com. You can use wfreedomnexus to find me on Twitter, my YouTube channel, as well as Instagram. And if I so choose to engage in it more, maybe Threads, but we'll see if this is going to be another Twitter or another MySpace, but that remains to be seen at this point. If you are listening to this on Apple iTunes, feel free to give me a 5-star rating or review, as that helps boost this up in the Apple algorithms so that other people can find this great podcast. Otherwise, if you're listening on Spotify or Podchaser or Overcast or a host of other platforms, whatever your recommended platform is, be sure to hit that subscribe button, the check mark, the follow, or whatever you need to check on your podcast platform choice so you never miss an episode. With that, hard to believe we're on episode 105 coming at you. What is that? I think it's October 18th here, 2023. Almost 2 years since I started this podcast. It was interesting when I started this. Wasn't sure if I make it a full 2 years. There's a big thing called pod fade out there where I don't remember the exact statistics, but so many of them pretty much fall off after episode 7. And some, take breaks. Some have seasons, kind of like, TV sitcoms, if you will. But some just, for whatever, right, wrong, or indifferent, they just drop off and never pick up again. So with that, I've been coming at you every single Wednesday for almost 2 years. I have not missed one, nor have had to do a replay or rerun, so to speak, on an episode. This has all been brand new content every single week for the last 2 years. So as I mentioned, I've touched base on numerous topics: real estate investing, personal development, money management, private equity funds, precious metals, cryptocurrencies, agri-parcel lands, turnkey, note, promissory note, and trust deed investing, just to name a few off the top of my head. But this was one I wanted to do for a while. And it was kind of hard to get someone that was, I don't want to say an expert, but maybe, actually knew more about this than I did. And I actually reached out to a friend, a colleague, Brandon Plumbon, who I've known for about 5-ish years, I believe. He kind of stalked me, if you will, on LinkedIn numerous years ago. At the time, he was working at a different community bank, ended up developing a relationship, ended up refinancing 2 of my properties with him, dropped our interest rate, saved about $400 a month combined. Now, in hindsight, I should have waited till about November of 2021 when rates were at the absolute lowest. But at the time, and even now at the time of this recording, 4.5% is not too bad for a commercial loan, not even bad for a residential, 30-year fixed Freddie Fannie loan. So really can't make much complaints there. But Brandon and I have known each other, like I said, for the last 5 years. We share a lot of interest and passions: finance, personal development, money, the Federal Reserve, banking policies, investing, as well as investment properties. Both of us have a small portfolio of investment properties. I think his is pretty much just in Minnesota. I could be wrong, but he was asking me some questions about some turnkey providers because I think he's looking to go outside of Minnesota, where I have, places scattered across the United States. So I wanted to bring him on for kind of some additional questions that I had in regards to banking, but I know some out there might be wondering as well, as far as, how banking works, but how do wires work? I'm sure all of us have had to do a wire at some point where we had to wire money from bank A to bank B, for a real estate transaction. Like I deal with quite a bit every, month in, month out as a real estate agent, working with title companies and banks and homeowners and sellers as they need to wire funds for the day of closing to, transact on a house. But what is a wire? How did wire come about? Where did the name wire come from? Those are just a couple of things my guest and I will be talking about in this podcast. But then also ACH. You might have heard of ACH, how you get your paychecks deposited every other week or maybe weekly. Maybe your bill pay, whether it's your Netflix subscription, your mortgage payment, your insurance premium, whatever might be coming out of your bank account on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis. How does ACH work? What are the pros and cons of ACH? What happens to money when it goes in between bank A and bank B where you don't have access to it at either one? So these are just a couple of the questions that I had. If I didn't know the answers to it, I knew Brandon would probably be able to provide that. And I was thinking, well, gosh, if these are questions I have, I'm pretty positive that there's at least one other of my listeners out there, whether you're in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, or Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Marshall, Minnesota, or Phoenix, Arizona, or Raleigh, North Carolina, just kind of rambling off a few of the download stats that I saw recently. So I figured this would be an interesting podcast and kind of do a little bit more deeper dive into pros and cons, differences between wires and ACHs, as they're pretty, unless you're a hermit and living in the, in a cave somewhere, pretty much everyone's going to have some, wires or ACHs in their life for bill pay or deposits or whatever. So with that, we're going to get into my interview with Brandon Plumbon after a word from one of our sponsors.
Check out the website simplepassivecashflow.com for podcasts, videos, articles, and free e-courses. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to the team via email and we'll get you pointed in the right direction, whether it be an educational course or information about syndication deals. If you haven't read my book, The Journey to Simple Passive Cashflow, click the link below to get a free copy. Thanks to John and the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast. Our team is here to help you take the first step, or if you're a seasoned investor, then we're here to expand your reach into alternative investing.
Hey, before we dive into this podcast, I've got one quick legal disclaimer. The views and comments expressed in this podcast are mine and not those of Northeast Bank, nor is Northeast Bank responsible for any losses, damages, and or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.
Brandon, thanks for coming on the show. How are things up in the cities, as we call it here in Minnesota?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me, John. Everything's great here. Just moved here and, moved back here because originally I'm from here in Minnetonka, and it's great to be back up in the cities and living life here.
Cool. All right. Well, as I kind of alluded to the intro, you and I connected, I think, at this point, I think it was maybe 5 years ago. I think you're hounding me on LinkedIn from a previous bank that you worked at, and, was able to save me some money on a commercial loan with some of my properties. And obviously we've been in touch ever since then. But there's been a number of things, I don't want to say secrets, but just questions I've had about, the banking industry and different terms. And I know some of my listeners have as well. Now, we've talked a little bit off camera, but for starters, there's always talk of like, well, I'll wire the money. I'll send a wire for the money. And many times I think wire and ACH are used interchangeably, but maybe taking a step back. First off, what is a wire, like in layman's terms, and what exactly is that and how does it work?
Yeah, so originally wire transfers, they date back to 1872, and they were first used by Western Union on the telegraph network, if you can believe it. So they, one individual, when they wanted to send a wire, they'd stop into the telegraph office, and the operator, they'd bring money, and then the operator would actually transmit a message, take the wire, and physically move it, connect it to another office, and they would wire the funds. That's where the term would come from.
Okay,
so,
interesting.
Yeah, so that's where it originally came from, and then that other location would have, and then they use, a company like Wells Fargo to obviously transport the money there as well. But by 1877, they were transferring $2.5 million each year, which is crazy in my mind. I doubt they adjusted that for inflation, but
right.
The fact that they're moving $2.5 million a year with a telegraph is crazy.
Interesting.
So when they originally started this, on the telegraph network, they would call it a telegraphic transfer. And some countries outside of the US, they still call it that today. But here in the US, typically it's referred to as a wire transfer. So what that process would look like, a customer would come into a bank or another financial institution, and they would give us an order to transfer a certain amount of money. And this is commonly referred to as the wiring instructions, right? And this would outline, who's sending the money, who's receiving the money, which bank is the money going to, and which bank account is supposed to be credited with the funds. So a lot of basic information there. But then the sending bank, so the bank that would be receiving those, would transmit a message via a secured system such as a SWIFT or FedWire to the receiving bank, requesting that they effect the payment according to the wiring instructions that they've been given, right? So they would pass along the instructions so the receiving bank knows how to process the transaction.
Gotcha.
Right? I think one misconception is that wires are always done instantly. After, which, that's not always the case. And once we release the funds and the wire is sent, the money, yes, that's true, it's gone and we can't get the funds back. But that's one reason why, wire fraud is very prevalent. John, as a real estate agent, title companies, you'll see the wire fraud disclaimer on all their stuff. Hey, if someone reaches out and says, hey, right before closing, say, hey, here's our new wiring instructions, wire money here, it's probably a red flag. So,
exactly.
And I'm sure we can go on to a whole nother episode of scammers and frauds. In the banking world, but I'll try and keep it a little simpler. But transactions typically are done instantaneously, but in the cases that they're not, along with those transmitted message of who's receiving the money and where's it going to and how it should be applied, the bank also has settlement structures from bank to bank, right, on how that transaction is supposed to be settled. So the actual transaction, it may take, hours or even days to move from the sender's account to the receiver's account.
Okay.
Especially with, international wires, you have different time zones, foreign holidays. May not be a bank holiday here in the US, but it might be a bank holiday in another country if you're doing an international wire.
Sure.
So generally speaking, both banks would involve in the wire transfer transaction. They're required to have a reciprocal account with each other, and the payment must be sent to a bank with such an account. So oftentimes, small community bank in Minnesota doesn't have a relationship with small community bank in California. Name your state, right?
Sure.
So they'll have to use a correspondent bank or kind of an intermediate. So they'll use a lot of local, smaller community banks, regional banks. They'll look to the larger banks, such as regionals or national players, to be and act as a correspondent bank on their behalfs.
Gotcha.
So that's how they would do it. So essentially, they'd be a middleman there. But if it's a small community bank here in Minnesota to another small community bank,
Sure.
often there's already the relationship there to send the wires.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's kind of funny when you mentioned that it's with like the intermediary bank, or maybe you're just calling it a middleman, if you will, maybe for layman's terms, years ago. And I've had them on my podcast. I think it was episode 51, if memory serves me right, with Paraguay Ag Invest, where bought a parcel of a citrus farm in Paraguay, and the parent company of it was in Germany and was wiring. I actually had to bounce around because trying to think of I was trying to do a TD Bank, and they didn't do wires internationally. So I moved the money to US Bank, which did do international wires. But then there was another bank, and I can't remember what it was, but it was from US Bank. Well, the whole process, it was from my TD Bank account to my US Bank account to another bank to a bank in Germany that was the headquarters of the company that ran Paraguay Ag Invest for the citrus parcel in Paraguay. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to what I've had to experience with wires, but maybe that's a little bit out of the realm of what maybe you're used to in your banking world.
Yeah, no. And oftentimes, I've only worked, my banking career, I've only been at community banks, right?
Okay.
So all smaller, under $1 billion in assets, which in the banking world, relatively small.
Right.
Size, right. So they've all been about the same size, community banks, multiple locations, but smaller. They're never been at a regional or large national player. But here in Minnesota, typically the larger banks, US Bank, Wells Fargo, act oftentimes as those correspondent banks.
Gotcha.
They're just the most popular here, at least in Minnesota. If you go outside of Minnesota, I'm sure you'll get more JP Morgan Chase and, some of the other larger players there.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah. Like you had said, wire fraud is, I could probably do a whole different podcast on that. Being a real estate agent, real estate investor, just all the due diligence. I know years ago there was a story that made national news. I think it was in Minneapolis, that it was someone's lifetime savings. I know it was over $250,000 that they were paying all cash for a house, and they got an email that they thought was from the title company of, oh, instead of sending it here, we need to send here. Okay, fine. So they just did the instructions, and boom, there it went. And basically the life savings, 6 figures, went away. They obviously couldn't buy their dream home. And like you said, with wires, especially when it gets to international, and then you're dealing with other countries, jurisdictions, governments that may or may not be as friendly to the US as Canada or Great Britain, just to name a couple. There it goes. And yeah, on one hand, you feel kind of bad for them, but on the other hand is like, just a quick 30-second phone call to the title company of, hey, I just got this email, just wanted to verify this. Is this legit? Could have saved them a lot of money and headaches.
Yeah. And, those things unfortunately happen, and I think wire transfers are one of the preferred ways to transact for the scammers and fraudsters, because it's just so quick, easy, where they get the cash. And as soon as we release the funds, they have access to the funds, and there's limited recourse. Like you said, especially being international, different jurisdiction, it makes it very difficult to have any sort of recourse there. But generally speaking, wires, they're typically done instantly, and it makes it one of the fastest ways to send and receive money from, point A to point B. And, this is also why typically banks will charge, a $20 to $40 fee for wire transfers, possibly a little more for international wire transfers. But if you want to think of it as, kind of like a one-on-one coaching, right? If you go to the gym, right? And to get a coach, and you get personal one-off attention where, you sit down with banker, they make sure that this transaction happens. Whereas ACHs, which we'll get to later, they're batched together more, right? So it's kind of sent in groups. So it's more of a group spin class, right? Or class. So there's many transactions, whereas wire is kind of a one-off. So it's a little more expensive typically, but you get that one-off service, and it's done a little faster as well.
Yeah. Well, like you said, depending on the industry, time is money. How fast do you need the money to go from point A to point B? Or if it's not as, crucial per se, kind of like the Amazon shipping. It's like, hey, do you want the free shipping, or do you want overnight for $20? It's like, yep, I'll do the overnight because I have to have my new Roku player or whatever I'm trying to get shipped from Amazon. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Where oftentimes timing, in large transactions with, with real estate and other transactions, they'll require a wire transfer because it's quick, it's fastest, easiest way to move money from point A to B. But oftentimes we're not always buying, $250,000 houses, right?
Right.
Maybe unless you're a real estate investor or something, but most people for everyday transactions where, to pay your Netflix subscription or any of your other subscriptions, ACH is it's a little better methodology for those smaller transactions. So, so first off, I'll just kind of go into what is an ACH. And,
sure. And maybe what's the acronym just for kind of remember, or what does ACH actually stand for?
Yeah. So when I was going through my notes here, I had a typo in my notes.
Oh, okay.
I had automated cleaning house. And I'm like, well, it's not a cleaning house. It's an automated clearing house.
Gotcha.
So I wish I had an automated cleaning house, but automated clearing house is the acronym, or ACH, right?
Okay.
So basically, an ACH is a payment just like a wire. So it's an electronic transfer made from one bank to another.
Okay.
And if you've ever signed up for, online bill pay, or if you've ever received a check from a direct deposit, you've benefited from the ACH network, whether you knew it or not. So all ACHs, they're routed through the Federal Reserve. Or the Clearinghouse Payment Company, which is a private business owned by the 24 largest world commercial banks.
Interesting.
So, and then I've got some fun facts as well for you.
Sure.
ACHs, John. So this is according to Google here. So, but so don't fact check me on these, but 93% of American workers get paid via direct deposit.
Okay.
U.S. Air Force was the first employer in the country to offer direct deposit. 99% of Social Security payments are made via ACH, direct deposit, which I thought was very interesting. And then in 2021, the ACH network processed 19.1 billion payments, totaling more than $72.6 trillion.
Wow.
So the ACH network processes a ton of transactions. So these are often these smaller, little everyday expenses that you have.
Gotcha. And I think you had alluded to previously when we were talking with wires, wires kind of like a one-off. Brandon sending money to John, John sending money to Brandon. It's like one transaction. But with the ACH, they're kind of, I guess to put as big of a comparison to, it's kind of like getting all the first class mail together in Marshall, shipping it up to St. Cloud, and then St. Cloud disperses it to other areas. It's kind of like almost a batch collection, and then it's not instantaneous. Is it like every 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, or?
Yeah, so you're exactly right, where they batch payment into groups, right? And then each bank kind of has their own process of how they batch them in, what times they have. And it makes it really difficult with time zones from, East Coast to West Coast. You're kind of all over. So one bank's cutoff time, on the West Coast versus East Coast might be slightly different, right? So 5 o'clock on the West Coast is 8 o'clock on the East Coast, right? So if you're trying to send transactions, sometimes that can be one of the downsides, if you will, to the ACHs, is that they're batched in groups. So typically a bank they'll take all their ACHs, and let's say a bank processes at 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and then 5 p.m., and they're the sending originating bank, but then the receiving bank, they might be in a different time zone, right? So let's say they go at 9 o'clock, noon, and 4 p.m. So if you were to send an ACH at 4:30 in this example, so if the originating bank cutoff is 5 p.m., receiving bank is 4 p.m. So it's still good for the originating bank, but it's after for the receiving bank. If you send it at 4:30, the originating bank will send it to the clearinghouse, but the receiving bank won't receive that until the next day.
Gotcha.
So going back to your original question of how long does it take, typically 1 to 3 days is pretty standard, but there are occasions of when that may be delayed a little longer. And this often occurs, with different time zones. ACHs are not processed on the weekends or Federal Reserve holidays, bank holidays.
Sure.
as you know, the clearinghouses are closed. So
Okay.
so for an example here, I'll give you, John, is if you initiate an ACH on Friday afternoon after all the bank's cutoff times on Labor Day weekend,
Ah,
a transaction may not be settled until, you know, the following Thursday, which is
right.
6 days later. And, you know, waiting a week for a transaction to post and process as a consumer and a business owner can be very frustrating.
Yep. So,
But at the same time, you know, some of the benefits to, you know, ACHs is that they're typically not going to cost you $20 to $40 to
right. With
they're
the
free,
wire.
typically, right? Sometimes there can be fees associated with them. I know most recently they've rolled out same day ACHs where you can send an ACH, assuming it hits all the cutoff times the same
Okay.
day, which acts and feels very much so like a wire. And from my experience, customers don't necessarily care how the money gets to point A and B, right? As long as they're safe, secure, on time, most people don't care, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I know you care because you're into the, you know, financial world. You like to know how things work, and just
Yeah.
kind of hearing, you know, just knowing you over the last 5-6 years or so, you know, I understand how you work and how your mind works. I
Yeah.
know just based off asking some of the questions that you ask. So
Exactly.
that would be some of the benefits, or some of the downsides there, but also some of the benefits are, you know, ACH is faster and easier to collect payments from customers for businesses. So businesses, they get paid faster, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to write individual checks. They don't need to collect cash. They don't need to make change. And it's less costly than, you know, processing credit card fees.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a whole nother tangent we can get on there as well, because with the, you know, a lot of point of sale terminals I've come across, it's like, is this a debit or a credit? And a credit will have, you know, 1%, 3% transaction fee, or in my opinion, what I think is smarter, if you're a business, like, hey, we'll give you a 2% discount if you pay in cash. So we have everything built in, but oh, you want to pay with cash or check, we'll give you a discount. But we won't get into the Visa, MasterCard, credit card at this
We won't
point.
go there.
Right.
But off, you know, I'll also add to that, you know, for consumers, you know, it's a simpler process for paying your bills. You know, going on bill pay, you just log into your bank's website, enter your biller's information details, and you can schedule a payment pretty much in minutes.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, as well as you get, you know, getting paid faster as a result of direct deposits and ACHs.
Right.
So I'll give you an example for me. You know, here at Northeast Bank, you know, we get paid biweekly every other Friday, right? And on Thursday, I see my paycheck pending in my account.
Okay.
So my paycheck is pending on Thursday because of the ACH network. It's processing it faster than when I should be getting paid. So
Gotcha.
when it should be posted. But so the benefit to consumers is technically I have access to it because it's in there pending if need be. So if, you know, I spend it and then overnight as a payments process, you know, that would correct that if I swiped the debit on my account and had, you know, went to Starbucks, got a coffee or whatever,
Sure.
and then the paycheck rolls in the morning, it would still credit that
Okay.
the following day on Friday.
Gotcha.
So I wouldn't have an overdraft fee there. And that's, again, each bank's kind of different there. But kind of going into the overdraft fees, I know that was one of your questions, is how does that work?
Right.
You know, if, you know, let's say a debit comes in at 9 a.m. and then a credit comes in at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're not hit with an overdraft fee. How does that work? And that's going to work, you know, depend on your bank's policies on what time their cutoff times are and processing times. And some banks even have automated software set up for pay or return features on overdrafts based on your relationship, previous history.
Okay.
For me, every morning I get an overdraft list in my email, and so I can see who's overdraft. And then if it's a large enough transaction, let's say I have a customer, they went negative $10,000, right?
Sure.
A large dollar amount, I'm like, all right, I better call my customer and see what's going on, right?
Right.
And oftentimes, you know, we as bankers, we kind of know what's going on in their world, but sometimes we're kind of shocked, like, that doesn't seem right, or that's not like them.
Right.
Often, you know, they might have just forgot to do a transfer. You know, that's a simple thing. Another one is, hey, I know we're closing a loan today, so that transaction just came in a little earlier than expected, so we can cover it that way as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, and kind of going back to like we said with the, batch out times or transfer times, every bank's a little different. Bank A does 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., but then Bank B does 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. or whatever they decide on. A lot of moving parts in the machine that could cause that to go temporarily in the negative. But then, like you said, the banking policy, I know I've had some online banks over the years. I'll get an email. It's like, hey, I don't remember wording, but it's like, hey, you might have insufficient funds. Please do a transfer or deposit money by 11:59 a.m. tomorrow, and everything's good, or noon or 2 or whatever the cutoff time is.
Yep. And oftentimes those are those automated software programs where it's, hey, gives a consumer a heads up, because a lot of banks, they'd get in trouble with consumers where they would, call someone back in the day and say, call them. And then the time you don't call them, they're expecting you to call them, right? So you set precedent there. So there's a lot of moving parts there and regulations that, where, there's potential issues there. So,
sure.
Yeah, a lot of the software programs kind of take care of it because they just do it automatically to everyone and it's consistent, right?
For investors seeking DSCR financing, check out timothyhero.com. The guy has closed over 150 DSCR loans in the last 2 years and has been appearing on podcasts and written about by journalists. He's well connected with some of the best lenders in the game and can get you the financing for your rental properties. Now, in a couple of questions, just from talking back and forth, especially on the ACH side, and obviously, we don't have the time to go through every banking policy for community, regional, national, international bank that's out there, but maybe just high level, like blockchain technology, crypto is kind of, building up and people are doing, coin-based transactions or whatnot, where it's kind of like 24/7, here it is. In this world, 24/7, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Netflix or whatever, why can't money just move on weekends or holidays? Why is it like, nope, sorry, you got to wait till Tuesday after Labor Day or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. So, that's obviously probably one of the largest downsides to our current system, right? Is the time. Everything's not instantaneous.
Right.
The ACH network, it wasn't built to be instantaneous because there's so many moving parts where, your bank has to send a request to the ACH, their clearinghouse, then to send it to the receiving bank and then back down the chain, right? So it's a little more indirect, if you will. So the channels aren't direct. But one possible solution outcome here is the Federal Reserve rolled out about 2 weeks ago, the FedNow, which is a new program that they released, and it's supposed to allow financial institutions safe, efficient, 24/7 instant payment services. So what it means is consumers and businesses can send and receive payments instantly in real time, and consumers and recipients will have access to the full funds immediately. So there actually holds, and this is brand new. It first rolled out, like I said, 2 weeks ago. On July 20th was the first live date.
Wow.
Right. So it's very new, July 20th, 2023. So I think generally speaking, though, I think it's going to be a game changer, right? Like we're trying to stay on top of the technology here at Northeast Bank, and I'm sure all the other banks are as well, of how is this going to change what we do, right? And, I know a lot of people have different opinions on Federal Reserve and the politics of it, and I'll try to stay out of that as well.
That'd be another podcast we can go down the rabbit hole on.
We'll do another one. But I mean, generally speaking, John, greater accessibility to funds and lower fees is typically a good thing for consumers and businesses, right? Like, that's just how it is.
Yeah, makes sense. So maybe as a final question, Brandon, and I won't name names, but I'll just say from Bank A to Bank B. And, we talked about this a little bit offline, where I transfer every month money from Bank A to Bank B. And this is set up monthly like clockwork. I'm not manually doing this. But then the first of the month, it's debited from Bank A. It shows it's removed from my account. I'm not earning interest on that money because it's obviously not there. But then depending on days, weekends, holidays, timing, whatever, Usually it's available within 2 to 3 days, but the exception was it took up to 7 days that it was available in Bank B. And then, okay, it's available in Bank B, it hits my account, I'm earning interest, etc. But going off of the extreme example of 7 days, grant that did include a 3-day weekend, I understand that. But where is that money in between there? It's not here and it's not here. I can't access it from either bank. Is it in Never Neverland? Is it in Jerome Powell's secret bank account? What happens there? It's like, if it's not in A, it should be in B, and vice versa.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I know most people would never even think to ask that question, but basically the funds are in transit, right? They're in the process of being not transported, but from one bank account to the other, right? So it's going to be pending. It's in kind of a limbo stage at that point until it hits both banks, right? Where you'll see it status change to process or processing, where it's in process, and then that's where it'll change. But it's in transit is where the money is.
Okay. So maybe with that Fed now, that might, obviously not here in 2023, but maybe a few years down the line, maybe that would be kind of a thing of the past. Who knows? So
yeah, like I said, I think FedNow is going to be a game changer, where it's, a lot of people are used to instant payment, where it's, hey, it's my money, I need it.
Yep.
I want it, right?
Was it that JG? It's my money and I want it now. Yeah.
Yep, right. Exactly. So it's people just are used to that instantaneous gratification, right? Where I want to send money and receive it. I want to send it and receive it now. So one thing I'll kind of go back to the ACHs of how kind of it works, just to give another example on the ACH side. On the ACH side, typically, in the early days, we had commodities, right? We had gold, silver, and, then we went to paper money, checks, and now with technology, transferring money digitally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back to, accounting 101, where you have your basic debits and credits on your ledger, same thing with the ACHs, right? So ACH has ACH debits and ACH credits, right? So an easy way to thinking of this is to visualize either pushing or pulling, right? So for ACH credits, it means that your money is being pushed from one account to another account. So if you want to think of this as your payroll, direct deposit, Social Security tax returns, the government is pushing the money out back into your bank account, right? And then the debits, ACH debits, mean the money is being pulled from one account and sending it to another. Think your mortgage payment, your utility bills, credit card payments, auto pay, right? So another example I think that people might get a little easier would be, think of Venmo, right?
Yeah.
Right? So if you have an ACH credit and, let's say you send $5 to your friend for pizza. Let's say I send you $5, John, for pizza because I owe you $5. I'm pushing the money out of my account into your account, right?
Okay.
And then same thing, let's say I forget to send you money.
Yep.
You'll
so
do
then
an ACH debit, where you'll request $5 and, from me to get reimbursed for the pizza.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
So interesting. Well, with all and maybe you and I are just kind of the money nerds, and maybe other people are out there. It's like, I could care less. It's like get my direct deposit twice a month. Everything's fine or whatnot. But any last, interesting banking trivia or fun facts off the top of your head you think my listeners might be interested in there?
Gosh, I don't have any other fun facts or anything else,
The Western Union telegraph wire, that was kind of interesting. It's like,
I had to do a little research because, my expertise, I'm not in the cash management. I'm not in the electronic services departments. I'm a commercial loan officer. So, I had to do a little research myself, because some of the questions you asked, I didn't have an answer to. Had to rely on, my team. But typically, I focus on the loan side, where I stay in my lane. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to shoot me a message. I'm sure John will have my contact info in the show notes somewhere. But yeah, other than that, John, I don't have anything else.
All right, sounds good. But yeah, and if, like I said, obviously you're based up in the cities, and for my listeners in Minnesota, if they want to reach out to you or learn more about the services you offer with the commercial banks or even with Northeast Bank, I'll put your contact information in the show notes. And obviously, I just had a download in Indonesia, so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to help that individual. But for my Minnesota listeners, which is pretty predominantly in Southwest Minnesota, Twin Cities area, if you're able to help out, I'll definitely send them your way.
Yeah, we might be able to help out with an international wire, but that's probably all we can do.
It's always interesting seeing the download stats. It's like I come across new cities. It's like I've never heard of Coatesville, Pennsylvania, or I can't even begin to pronounce the ones overseas.
Sure. But no, that sounds great, John. I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, thanks for coming on. I learned some things as well, and hopefully my listeners did also. So with that, have a great rest of your Friday, Brandon, and hope you have a great weekend as well.
Perfect. Happy Friday, John. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. For more updates, check out www.wealthandfreedomnexus.com. Remember, nothing on this show should be considered tax, legal, investment, or professional advice. This show is produced solely for educational and informational purposes. Please consult an appropriate and licensed tax, legal, real estate, or business professional for specific advice for your situation. For distribution or publication rights or media interviews, please contact the host.